Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. North Korea has declared that it has entered a state of war with South Korea and is threatening nuclear strikes by moving its ballistic missiles to its eastern coast. The North Korea's new young leader, 30-year-old Kim Jong-un, has rattled the entire world community by such belligerence. The immediate provocation seems to be the joint military exercise by South Korea and United States in the Korean peninsula. North Korea, which conducted its third nuclear test in February this year, is facing severe international sanctions. This test has to some extent alienated its only strong ally China too, while Russia is also not happy with it. The danger of all this pushing the North Korean regime to take some extreme action has rattled observers, though many feel that it is just saber rattling which the country is known to indulge in periodically. However, the fact that it has acquired nuclear missiles poses a huge threat to South Korea, Japan, and the United States in particular, and the world order in general. So we will be discussing all this today while asking the question, how serious is North Korea's nuclear threat? To discuss this, I have with me Rajiv Sikri, former Secretary East, Ministry of External Affairs and a veteran diplomat, Nihal Singh, veteran editor and a journalist with vast experience in the region, Rajaram Panda, former senior fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis and someone who has been studying and writing on the Korean region, and Pramit Chaudhary, foreign affairs editor, Hindustan Times. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Sikri, I would like to come to you first. There are two views on what is happening. One is that this is just one of those periodical threats which the North Korean government keeps indulging in, and the second view is that it is much more serious than anything. Last time, even the UN Secretary General is very, very concerned about it. He says that he's also very concerned that it can just lead to some miscalculation and lead to some serious threat. How do you see it?
Well, it is true that the North Korean leaders have been doing saber rattling in the past, but I think the difference this time is that here is a young, untested leader who has just come into power, and he needs to establish his credentials with the military and with the country as a whole. So this is what makes it a little unpredictable. He's obviously inexperienced, and as I said, he's less than 30 years old. I suspect that matters will not go out of hand, but Kim Jong-un would have calculated wrongly, I think, that all his neighbors have got new leaders. The Chinese leadership is new, the Japanese Prime Minister is new, the South Korean president is new. So he may have thought that this is a good time to have his nuclear tests and the missile tests. And maybe he did not anticipate this kind of a firm reaction from the United States, because for the United States, the key issue is to show that their alliance with Japan and South Korea is a credible one against the backdrop of a growing perception in both these countries that the Americans cannot be relied upon in such situations. There was this perception because the Philippines, which is also an ally of the United States, did not get satisfaction when the Chinese did rattling. So the Americans are in a bit of a spot as to how to show that their alliance and their deterrence is a credible one.
Okay. Mr. Nihal Singh, do you agree with Mr. Sikri's view, and also the fact that this new leadership, the new young leader trying to assert himself, is that just that, or is there something more to all this?
Well, I would broadly agree with him, but I would like to emphasize two things. One is that North Korea has been difficult to read at the best of times, and the added complication now is you have an untested leader. Secondly, I think you shouldn't forget that he is trying to prove himself to his generals, first of all, because he has to consolidate his own position. So it's important for him to show that he is a strong leader and so on, despite his age and lack of experience. But I think it's equally true that he has rattled the world, as you suggested. That is true, because for various reasons.
Right.
I mean, America has to guard its flock, apart from the fact that, and what everybody is afraid of is not that Kim Jong-un wants to begin a war, but all this threat, of course, the rhetoric gets more bellicose every day. It might lead to a misadventure of some kind and escalate the situation all around, which would be a disaster.
Absolutely.
Primarily for the North Koreans themselves, but also for the rest of the region.
Yes. Okay, Dr. Panda, you know this escalation, which the UN Secretary General is also talking about, some kind of a misadventure, as Mr. Nihal Singh says. Do you see that possibility happening? How do you read the situation as of today? Today also, we just now in a few hours back, we were reading reports that they have moved the second missile towards the eastern coast and things like that.
I will agree with Mr. Nihal Singh broadly, because the North Korean leadership is very unpredictable, and we have experienced this kind of behavior even in the past, but this time things are a bit different, and any miscalculation might escalate. That is a possibility. I would emphasize one point. I think China is the only country which probably can have any sobering influence on North Korea. And this time, there are reports that even China also is losing its patience.
Exactly.
And that is the biggest fear, according to me.
And Russia also.
Russia, in fact, just in today's news that the North Korean leaders, they have advised the North Korean diplomats to leave the country.
Leave the country.
So that again is not a very positive sign.
Absolutely.
So the domestic factors, like within North Korea, the young leader may be trying to consolidate his position, and these are all indications that his way of drawing attention of the world. And another angle also to look at it is this is a one way to draw the attention of the world to help. To get help.
To get help.
To get help.
The country is in very bad state.
Very bad state. The economic situation is in very precarious condition, and it is facing sanctions of the international sanctions.
There's a lot of hunger and people dying of hunger.
Yes,
and all this.
Even there are reports that even some people are eating human flesh out of hunger.
Right.
So the internal domestic situation is very bad. Say, South Korea is one country which is willing to help, and even the joint the Kaesong industrial complex, that is the main source of hard currency for North Korea. Even that also they have threatened that they shut down. So this will be, the impact will be extremely negative for North Korea itself. So given all these unpredictable situation, I would still imagine a major conflict will not arise, because at the appropriate time, I think sober counsel will prevail, and China will probably intervene. That is what I could expect, and China will play its card at the right time.
You think at the right time?
At the right time. That is what I would expect and hope also.
Pramit, will China play its cards? The signals which are coming out of China about the latest situation in North Korea is that they are also very frustrated about the way North Korean leadership has been. So, where do you think? At what point do you think the Chinese will come back and say, okay, let's do something here?
Well, I think you've already seen that the Chinese have been very careful not to say anything supportive of North Korea.
Right.
They have basically just said both sides should not get out of hand. Things should be stable. Nobody should do anything, which for them is effectively a criticism of North Korea.
Do you think the US and China will be able to work together now in this situation and try to bring about some, as Dr. Panda is talking about?
Well, I'm sure Washington is communicating to Beijing that please do something. They're doing it definitely in public, so I'm presuming they're doing it in private. China will obviously argue that it's bilateral relationship. North Korea and Pakistan are its two closest allies in the world. They don't like other countries to tell them what to do. But it's almost certain that they are communicating to North Korea that, there's a limit to how far you can play this kind of game. Because not only is it destabilizing for an area that's obviously important to China, it's right next door to them, But it's also embarrassing for Xi Jinping. He's a new Chinese leader. He's trying to position himself as a more moderate and more sensible, rational leader than Hu Jintao was, at least on the foreign policy side. And then, of course, this is breaking out. But keep in mind that China clearly is never going to go beyond a certain point in terms of breaking its relationship with North Korea. And you'll notice that one Chinese journalist who actually wrote an article saying that maybe this is now time for China to break its relationship with North Korea was promptly sacked by the Beijing government, who sacked him and said this is an unacceptable position to take. So obviously China is not going to go beyond a certain point. The real game, I think, right now, as the other speakers have mentioned, is one, he's an inexperienced leader, but it's almost certain that in this case the North Korean military is doing almost everything. They are just using his image, but it's the military leadership, in my view, who is actually carrying out all of these actions. It's unusually provocative, even by North Korean standards. The question really is, where do they call it off? What do they do at the final stage? Having escalated it, they can't just walk back. They have to do something. So there's an assumption from what some of the analysis coming out, there's an assumption that they're going to fire a missile, maybe over Japan, as they've done once before, or over South Korea, plunge it into the ocean and then forget about it and then say, look, we've reached that level. But the question really is, does something go wrong when they go for that final act in this drama?
Which can prove very, very disastrous. Mr. Sikri, it's very interesting that an Indian delegation was in Pyongyang yesterday. Does India play any role in this?
Well, of course, we have said that this was a pre-planned visit and it has got nothing to do with the present crisis. But just today I saw some reports by Western analysts suggesting that the Indian team which went there, led by Mr. Bambawale, the Joint Secretary dealing with the region, was at the urging of the United States. And that India could play a role in diffusing the crisis. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but perhaps the Americans want first-hand assessment from an independent source of what is really going on there. Anyway, whether or not this is coincidental or our delegation's visit was in response to US urgings, I think that whatever we pick up, and I'm sure that this issue will be discussed or will be on the table there, I think that the Indian assessment will play a role. Let's not forget that 60 years ago, when the Korean War was on, India played a very leading role in diffusing the crisis and in communicating between China and the United States at that time. So I find it interesting that some American analysts are seeing a similar role for India today. I don't know enough about what is happening in North Korea right now, the talks with India, to form a judgment on it. But the fact that there is speculation in this regard is, I think, significant.
Okay. On that note, I think we will go into a short break, but we will come back and continue this discussion and see how this crisis can be diffused. Please keep watching. We'll come back very soon. Welcome back. We are discussing the North Korean nuclear threats and asking the question, how serious is it? Mr. Nihal Singh, this is it a given now that North Korea has nuclear capability? Would you say it's a given?
Well, it's a given that it has nuclear capability, but it's not given and very doubtful that it can mount a warhead, a nuclear warhead on a missile. And I don't think it's anywhere near it. Might take estimates vary 6 months to a year. But I would like to emphasize in this whole crisis that China's dilemma is the greatest.
Exactly.
Because it is the one country and the only country that is keeping North Korea afloat.
Absolutely.
Through oil and other assistance of various kinds. Now, what the Chinese are worried about is, of course, that if there is reunification, if there's a collapse of the North Korean regime and there's reunification, then they will lose out in the geopolitical sense.
Exactly.
And of course, they're also worried about hundreds of thousands of refugees crossing over into China. I think the Chinese must be thinking what they can do to defuse the crisis. Of course, formally they are saying calm down both sides, blah, blah, which means nothing. How can they persuade the North and leadership of the North, especially the young man,
exactly,
if he is running the show? It's not even clear if he's running the whole show. But shall we say the leadership of North Korea, how can China prevail upon them to pipe down without losing too much face?
Right.
Because in terms of the decibel level of their rhetoric, which is always high in North Korean terms, I mean, this is extraordinary, even by North Korean standards. How does he climb down now? And what sop can China prevail upon the rest of the world to give him? I think that's
that is the key question.
Yes.
Dr. Panda, you think that is the key question? And see, it is said that every time North Korea wants US to come to the table, start the talks again, they indulge in this kind of rhetoric. Is that the case this time also?
That is what they have been telling, but here in this context I would like to mention two quick points. One is India's role.
Right.
Now, India's role is whether what Mr. Rajiv Sikri said, whether our delegation has gone there on the urging of the United States. I'm not so sure, but I have the information that Gautam Bhabewala's visit to Pyongyang probably was planned about a month and a half ago.
That's the official line which has been taken also.
Yes. In fact, there was a dinner reception which Sanjay Singh, the Secretary East, gave to the North Korean ambassador, farewell dinner, during lunch, during which time this was being discussed. So I was there. So it is, it may not be correct to say that the visit is timed now.
But the US would be certainly interested in what...
US will be certainly interesting. I mean, will be definitely interested to know for India to play a role. And now that India's relation with the United States is growing in different dimensions very closely, I think, and also India being an emerging power, the United States would expect, given the kind of relations which India has with both the Koreas, to play some role. And also we have the history with us, because we don't have any historical irritants and any kind of baggage. So probably India's can have some role. Now that is number one. Point two is, so far as the question of unification is concerned, I do not expect unification, at least in my lifetime.
But that can't stop China from being concerned about it.
At the same time, at the same
expect the fall of the Banil War?
at the same time, I would also not expect the North Korean regime to collapse, because China will not let that happen.
Will not allow that to happen.
China will not let that happen. The unification will not happen because an unified Korean peninsula will not be acceptable, and also will not be to the interest of Japan, Russia, China, and also United States.
Right.
So
okay. Anyway, we will. Sir, I want to come back to you, Mr. Nihal Singh, about the Indian role. Mr. Sikri was pointing out how India had played a role even 60 years back, and now also they're expected to play. Do you, with your experience of the past, do you see that possibility? What kind of a role can India play?
It can only be, in my view, a limited role, in the sense that we can brief the Americans, which I'm sure we are doing,
yes,
about their impressions of the North Korean setup
yes,
and leadership and behavior of the people they have met, would be at senior level, officials senior level. So to that extent, yes, it would be helpful. But I do not think that India can play a major role in this.
Okay. Pramit, what will bring North Korea back to the table? What do you think will bring it? Who will be playing a key role? China, of course, but is there anything which US can offer which can bring North Korea to the table?
Well, the obvious thing would be talks at some point, but I think right now, when North Korea uses this type of rhetoric in the past, it's done for not just one reason, for multiple reasons.
Yes.
One of them is a legitimization of a new leader, or a leader who may be facing trouble at home. And definitely in the case of Kim Jong-un, it's a case of a new leader who's seeking legitimization, I think. The other time when they use this type of rhetoric is when they're trying to force America to the negotiating table over something or another. In this case, my guess is that it's mostly about legitimization. And what they will look for is potentially going to the talks with America somewhat later down the timeline. But I think for this game, and where I would suspect that if America had sent a message to the Indian delegation that since you're there, why don't you have a little chat with them and
that possibility was there.
I think that's a very strong possibility because we've done similar things with other countries, including Iran, on behalf of the United States. So therefore, I think what we may be seeing is a message from Washington. We understand why you're doing this. These are the red lines. When you decide to call this, bring this entire drama to an end, fine. But as we've been discussing, how does he bring the curtain down in a manner that doesn't make him look like he's walking back? So as I said, some of the analysts that I'm reading, and given that what they've done in the past would be a straightforward missile test. They can't do a nuclear test because they've just done one, so it's unlikely to. They began the escalation, if you wish, with a nuclear test. So how do you end it if you started with something that big? And once he's done that, I think then we'll start to see a completely different North Korea, which is very common. They turn on a dime, as they say in America, on suddenly going from completely fearsome rhetoric to suddenly talking in a very reasonable and fashion manner.
That de-escalation will take some time.
I don't think it may actually.
You don't expect suddenly the tensions to de-escalate. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm saying that it'll reach a crescendo. After that, I think we'll actually see we may actually see it normalize quite rapidly.
Mr. Sikri, you think that the normalization process will take some time, and what is it? The same question which I asked: what is it that will bring the North Korea to the table? Is it one of the things which is being said is that the North Koreans want desperately to be treated as a nuclear weapon state? That possibility is very, very remote, right?
I think the primary goal of the North Koreans is to engage in direct talks with the United States and get recognition from the United States. That's the number one goal.
Okay.
And secondly, of course, apart from the regime preservation and so forth, I think that the possibility of any reunification of Korea really frightens them, just as it frightens the Chinese.
Right.
Because a reunified Korea would mean a NATO American presence or an American military presence right next to China's borders.
Right.
That's something China would not want. It will take a little while for the crisis to diffuse. I think I'm sure that Mr. Bambawale, if the Americans have indeed been speaking to us, would have conveyed quite clearly that the Americans are serious and they should not be trifled with. There are some red lines to be drawn. The initiative has also come from the South Koreans. The South Korean president is willing to give humanitarian aid and other assistance to the North. There's food issues also. But the president has to walk a very thin line between seeming to stand up to the North Korean pressure and yet not closing the door. So all these factors will take a few weeks to play out, I think.
Okay. Mr. Nihal Singh, so in these few weeks you expect, is there a danger of some misadventure happening?
Well, I think that is what everybody is worried about. Because if you raise the pitch to the level that North Korea has and even move batteries to the coast and so on, apart from the threats, I think the danger is there. I do not think we can wait for weeks for that danger to be evident. I think it must happen sooner. Now, there again, I would suggest that the Chinese role would be crucial.
Okay.
Whether they really step up and say, privately, of course.
What about the Russian role here?
The Russian role, I don't think, is that important in terms of
Let me get Mr. Sikri, do you think the Russians will be able to play any role in this at this point of time?
Well, both the Russians and the North Koreans are wanting to develop a much closer relationship because the North Koreans want to reduce their dependence on China, and Russia is the only other neighbor that they have. But Russia's ability to play a role is limited. I think all that they can do is, promise that we will make investments, we will have this railway line, we will use North Korea as a transit to South Korea, stuff like that. But for the immediate, I don't think they can do very much except to urge caution on the North Koreans, which I'm sure that they are doing.
Okay, Mr. Panda, where does Pakistan figure in all these things? There has been this talk always that it was Pakistan which has helped North Korea in its nuclear weaponization and things like that.
This is actually an open fact, because that is one factor which should worry India, because the North Korea and Pakistan nexus, nuclear nexus, even in the early 90s, when Benazir Bhutto visited, and there are reports, Shyam Bhatia's book, I think you must have heard about it, what is it, Goodbye Shahzadi or something like that. So that vividly says the kind of
relationship,
the relationship which Eku Khan also the role played. So that should be a point of worry for us, India. So far as China is concerned, I think China is the only country, according to my understanding, which has the final card to play. And I think there will be a gradual de-escalation. It will not be quick, and the effort should be to get North Korea back to the negotiating table. The first step should be to de-escalate, and then also the effort should be on to revive the six-party talks, from which North Korea has walked out. And denuclearization process is going to be more difficult, because this time North Korea has announced to the world that they will not barter anything, not even for billions of dollars of aid.
Right.
And they will not give away their nuclear weapons.
You think that is just high rhetoric, and if aid is what North Korea is looking for.
Well, North Korea always needs aid. I think I was mentioning I once met a U.S. diplomat who had been negotiated with the North Koreans for a number of years, and I asked him what it was like, and he would say, well, the North Koreans will begin by basically threatening to destroy the world, and then after 15 minutes, when the Americans would say, okay, what do you really want, they would say, give us rice. But I think
this situation today is not just that you can buy them through rice.
No, you never could. I think they always needed rice at some points, and they would use that as part of one of their demands. But ultimately, what I think is going to be interesting is to see, once the present ruler, the new ruler, sort of settles in, what are his priorities going to be? Because if you remember, his father began in very similar fashion. But near the end, he was talking about trying to replicate the Chinese economic miracle in North Korea.
Sir, last words to you, Mr. Nihal Singh. If he follows his father, the president, the Kim Jong-un, you think the world will be a safer place?
I think he will climb down. That's my guess.
Okay. On that optimistic note, we will end this discussion. But this is an area and something which we'll need to keep very close watch on. It takes some time to de-escalate, and hopefully there won't be any misadventure during this period. But we'll keep a close watch. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Rajiv Sikri, Mr. Nihal Singh, Mr. Rajaram Panda, and Pramit Chaudhary. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on The Big Picture, same time on Monday.